Okay, Mbula Vinaka, everyone. Our sincere apologies. We are back again, some technical issues on this side. So my apologies here in Hawaii. My internet just dropped off. So I was really into listening to Seini, and I saw her talking, but I was out of the whole loop. So Vinaka vakalevu, Mbula Vinaka, Malo Lele, Talofa Lava, Aloha. Thank you so much for those of you who are logging back in. So my sincere apologies. Okay, so here we are. And okay. Okay, so we are back on again.
Great.
Okay, Vinaka vakalevu. Okay, thank you so much. Vinaka for those of you who jumped on back again. So maybe saying we may have to go back to the beginning, if that's okay with you. So I will do the greetings, and then we'll go back to your Tongan connection, and then just segue back into what you were talking about in terms of the media. That's a really wonderful way of you explaining your artist side and the media, and especially dealing with the events over the weekend, which is very emotional, yeah, on so many levels. And thank you so much, Seini, for highlighting that, because it's not easy. As we all know, many of us are watching from all over the world, even here for me in Hawaii, and many of my colleagues in the US. I really want to acknowledge Dr. Tevita Kaili, from Laie. So we've been constant contact and looking at ways where we can be able to contribute, yeah, back to Tonga. So let's head back to the beginning of our Talanoa Seini. First of all, to acknowledge you, Seini, for agreeing to come on my program. I know you do follow my program, and when you agreed for you to come and speak, I was so happy. And I felt that you were the best choice to come at this moment. The reason I say that is that I read your interview in The Guardian, and that gave me the idea that Seini would be someone who is very strong at this moment, to share your story. That was so beautiful, how you were able to navigate those spaces, those difficult spaces, I must say. So to kickstart our Talanoa, if you could be able to introduce yourself again and reconnect your whānau back to Tonga, please, Seini.
Thank you so much for having me. Siata ofa, everyone. My name is Seini Faleaka Taumoepeau. I actually go by many names, but primarily I'm known also as Sistanative. Yeah, I'm speaking to you from the Gadigal lands, specifically this suburb that I live in the indigenous language of the Gadigal is called Bulanaming. And we're part of the city that grew from the very first settlement since the first fleet from the European places came here, Sydney, Australia. So we call it so-called Sydney, Australia. And I guess the first thing I will say about myself is that I have 4 Tongan grandparents. The places that they come from are Nukunuku, Kotu, in Ha'apai, Neafu, so Mount Dalau in Vava'u, and Kolovai I said, Nukunuku I said, Kotu I said, Neafu I said. But my parents' houses are called Tataihoko in Nukunuku, Lotokolo, that's in Hihifo in Tongatapu. And my other grandparents' house is called Apfo'o because we migrated from Kotu Ha'apai across to Nuku'alofa. And so we're there in Kolomotu'a. So my 2 houses are Tataihoko and Apfo'o.
So thank you so much, Seini. And I must say that before we went live in the previous Talanoa, we were talking about kinship, yeah, and how your network, it's really difficult to just point at one place. There will be connections that will take you to different places. So here you're saying Hapai, Tuneyafu, Polovai, Potu. You also mentioned Kolomotua. Yeah, so
Yep.
that's in Tonga.
Yes, that's the neighborhood inside Nuku'alofa.
Right.
Yep. So we're not indigenous to that place.
Right. Okay. So you moved in. Is it from Hapai?
Yep, from Kotu, which is a small place in Hapai. Yeah,
Okay,
and my family came over to Nuku'alofa 6 generations ago. Oh. So we remember.
Wonderful. And you were mentioning in a previous interview that you were born in Australia. So you are the new generations that were born in Australia.
Yeah, my generation were born in Australia in terms of my mother's children. My mother's siblings, their children have been born. Some of them have been born in Tonga, but most of them are in Muli, so outside of Tonga. And, you know, mostly in America, New Zealand, and Australia. And one of the reasons why I say my generation are the first to be born and remain in Australia is because my grandmother had given birth to my uncle, who's already passed, Molitoni. He's passed away in Oregon just recently, but he was actually born in Australia. And I'm looking into whether or not he was the first Tongan to be born in Australia. We're not sure. So I'd be interested to find out if anybody knows.
Wow, that's amazing. So I'm just looking at your background. So you're really interested too in history. You are an artist, you're an activist. And in your last interview, you were mentioning about your name as Sistanative. So what encouraged you to work by that name, Sistanative? What inspired you?
I named myself after the book by Haunani K. Trask, which I found by chance in my university library. And I studied regionally. And so I'd never been home. I'd never been away from home. Like I'd never been away from family, you know, when I decided to move. And it was really, it had such a profound effect on me finding that book. And then 2 others, which were books on Samoan music and Tongan music by Richard Moyle. Those books literally gave me life. Being in a very white Australian town, and encouraged me deeply to connect with the local community there, who are the Bunjalang, and have, of course, adopted me and become my family.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I also know that your sister Latai also work in the arts. Just say briefly what kind of work she does in that space.
So my sister was born Funaki Latai Taumoepeau. When she went to New Zealand and studied at Fiturea Polytechnic, we didn't have courses like that here. So she was 21 and she studied, what was it called? I think it was called Pacific Performance. She began as a dancer in her 20s, and that movement practice has become, I think she calls it a body-centered arts practice, generally just whaiva. And she does a lot of contemporary art work that talks about the effects of climate change on Pacific communities, using her body as a representation of Pacific people, or sometimes the environment, perhaps the reef. Basically, it's through an Indigenous lens, talking about climate change from that perspective. The Moana.
That is amazing. That is amazing. You know, it just shows the, you know, even I see her perform, you know, in different spaces, it just shows her strength, that inner strength to be able to be courageous, right? To tackle those really, really difficult topics, especially when it comes to climate change, because it can be very politicized on so many levels. But for her, she was able to navigate the spaces in the arts, and for her to work as a performing artist. Or performance artist, yeah, in those spaces. Now, when it comes to Tonga, I know I asked you in the previous Talanoa, how often do you and your siblings visit Tonga?
Well, my sister is the one who goes back the most. I told you she was working, she was studying and then working for Fiturea Dance Company, and they toured through, they did Indigenous festivals throughout the world, performing cultural material. And so when she decided to finish that work, she's the one who started going back pretty much every year. My mother just passed away in 2019. So prior to her passing, she also was going back. She'd actually retired and reverse migrated back to Tonga. I think it was when I went to uni in the 90s, which is our plan. Like our plan is that like Australia isn't home forever. From the perspective of our family here in Sydney. So my sister actually was moving back, planning to move back next year. So we're kind of in the throes of planning that. Between the ages of 0 and 8, I was living in Tonga most of the time because I had 2 grandparents' homes to go to and lots of my parents' younger siblings were some of the older grandchildren. So it means they can stay here and work and set up their life, and they can send us home to have our full family. And when we explain that to people in Morley, they don't understand what that is. For a young mother or young parents to not have first Christmas and not fill the house with baby things. But that was our life. And at that time, Tongans are so mobile. I know that's true for Pacific people, but from my personal experience, I try my best to just speak from my own experience because our experiences are so diverse. And my experience has been that, especially being born in the 70s and growing up through the 80s, living in Australia, we were literally back and forth, every 6 months or whenever somebody was going home to the grandparents, it was obligatory that you bring the grandchildren. Almost the same as if you lived in the suburb next door these days. If the car is heading there, then they're going to be fine on the other end. So you just pack them up and take them. So for me, it's a beautiful life, and it has informed everything I've done ever since, because I know the various versions of Pacific life from that time, because in those days we had to stop off in Fiji or we had to stop off in New Zealand to get to Tonga. These days there's a direct flight, but in my mother's time and my uncle's time, the one that I mentioned in the article, I always marvel at what they needed to do to travel. They would get cargo ship from Tonga, and when they'd be heading toward Sydney, they'd stop off in New Zealand, then they'd have to, so it wasn't a passenger ship, cargo ship. And sometimes they were traveling in large family groups. Then they would ship across to here, and they'd stay here for a while. And the same thing going back, but they wouldn't be necessarily doing it, flight to flight. Sometimes they'd have to taxi from one city in Fiji to another city to get the flight to Tonga. So we think about all of those kinds of things when we talk about family, especially in these past 3 days.
Yes.
The differences in who we are compared to who our parents have been in their experience, and our grandparents and what they experience. And we roll that up into what we do as our daily practice of living.
Yes, absolutely. Wow, thank you so much for highlighting that. As I mentioned in a previous Talanoa, the different features of different island groups. I've had the pleasure of working with different island nations, and there's something about Tonga, as I mentioned. It's always very, very close. People they do things together. Whether you are in America, whether you are in Australia or New Zealand, there's always that togetherness that sets Tonga apart from, even though the other nations also have their own uniqueness too. Now, coming to the events over the weekend, with the interview, how did your family get to know about what was happening back home? I know with the recent event, there was the eruption that took place in December, and then again in the last, next to each other on Friday, I think, and Saturday, if I remember. But I know the history of this goes back to 2009, right? And 2014, because as I wrote in one of my posts, I was very intrigued because my background is in geography. When I heard that a new island has been formed, I got interested. I was like, wow, I need to read about this. And little did I know that this is exactly the same island I got excited about of what happened over the weekend. So tell us a little bit more about what was the discussion or the Talanoa within your family, say.
It was interesting because I've been having to go back to that moment of when did you find out? Where were you sitting? What were you doing? And it was in terms of this weekend, my sister was doing that bad habit of being on her mobile phone in bed at nighttime, you know, like the thing we're not supposed to do. And we've been trying our best to stop doing that. But luckily, you know, she knew earlier than me. So even though she was doing the wrong thing and I was doing the right thing, she got the news first and let me know. And then she ended up, I think, going back to sleep. And then I just got on my phone and just didn't stop for until I spoke to the reporters from The Guardian. That was the only thing that kind of stopped me looking for information and trying to create some type of strata, not just for myself, but because, you know, we have obligations and roles that we play. And, you know, in the article, I say that my uncle is an important person, meaning he has many obligations in the community. And that filters through to many of us. And so, for example, I live an urban life in an inner city suburb in Sydney, but I had one of my cousins messaging me saying, what are we going to do about all the salt water on the plantation? And, you know, because I'm somebody who can deal with information, lots of it through my training, I feel that I did what most Tongans do, which is look at your skills, and exactly what you were saying that you were doing with Dr. Ka'ili is that you look at your skills and you think, what now can I contribute? For me, that happens to be information. I can process information through my media training and my arts training. And so I immediately got to that. And interestingly, I was calling it work. In the article, you'll see I was calling it, I've been working because in my role as a broadcaster, I know how to do that. Like you wake up and you go to work and you basically are churning through many, many, many stories. And a lot of the time they're Pacific stories, like when I had my Pacific show on ABC. So I was kind of basically living that life on steroids for the past, I wasn't on steroids, I just mean I was doing a lot of it for 48 hours straight before I spoke to the person at The Guardian.
Wow.
But a lot of people are doing similar things, you know, working out because there's so much energy when you have a shock like that. And also being a media worker, the dark that we were all sitting in for far too long in terms of not just the fact that an internet cable had gone down, but the people who live in first world countries, and this is completely just my opinion, we are communities that contribute to the societies that we live in. And the storyteller organizations, the industries have a responsibility to us to give us news about the things that we care about and the things that affect our lives. And the fact that there was a 16-hour to 24-hour window of no information, and we're finding that information on things like Twitter, from satellite photos. For me, because a lot of the information was coming in as science data, and people don't know what to do with what's going on with all that weather, islanders, we can't see underneath that mushroom, so we're scared about what might be found there. So for me, it was more about giving things a human voice. And it wasn't really my voice. I wasn't broadcasting or anything. Some people were. But especially for my own personal community, I felt that I had to use my skills in the best way. And I was used to reporting on, you know, cyclone season and that kind of thing in the islands. So I just did the same thing that I would do if I was at ABC. I just did it, but I did it on my Facebook. And in Messenger.
Right, that's a very good point, and thank you, Seini, for being able to straddle between the two fields of work, you know, being in the media, but also being an artist. And I know those two fields of work, they're not easy, you're navigating it constantly, and it can be draining. And also at the same time, in this case, you are dealing with people who are close to you, and it's very, very personal. And in terms of your family, how do you talk amongst yourselves? I'm just going back to the question of how do you deal with saltwater plantation from your cousin? So are these all these conversations that you are trying to look beyond, looking at the rebuilding maybe? Is that what some of the conversations you're having, Seini, within your family?
Well, I guess like in my media role, I was the one not telling, I'm usually reporting on other people's stories. Right. So for me, it always starts with questions. So really it's like what I was doing was mostly collating information and questions to check and see how people are. Yeah, I mean, because we've had lots of funerals and different things like most islanders, the way that I've organized our communication is that I have one Facebook thread for my mother's first cousins, and I have one Facebook thread for my father's first cousins. We're some of the older grandchildren on both sides, so we get to kind of determine some of these things. And so that's my go-to. And one of those threads in particular is a very active thread all the time. I am really not the most expert person on those threads. So a lot of the time it's about, just like any Talanoa, you're collating all of the information. Some people have jobs on the front line of the crisis. Some people have, governmental responsibilities. Some people have very important familial responsibilities. And some people, and it should never be discounted because Pacific do this the best. Some people are there witnessing everything, and they're absorbing, and that is a really important job. So in many ways, I might tell the story that I'm the one sending messages, but really I'm the one who has the benefit of my family's attention. And especially in moments of like that, where people who are the most expressive, they're not necessarily the ones who know the most, or the ones who they're the ones where that's, their role in the world. And my role is to speak and talk and use my voice. And in my family, that's kind of understood.
Wow, that's wonderful. And that's very brave of you, Seini, when I saw your, your interview, and you're able to, share your feelings and the frustrations, plus also the stress you had to go through to sleep at a very few hours just to keep on top of everything and trying to get through to the information on the ground. Now, I found out lately that you're able to find out more about your uncle, and he's okay.
Just a little bit. We're lucky in the sense that our lagoon means that where the land that's developed, like the mangroves, are far away from where the deepest part of the ocean is. Right. And so Nukunuku village, where he is, yes. And he's also Lotokolo, so he's even further from there. It's quite high. Okay. Yeah, but when I was talking to my aunt, his younger sister in New Zealand, it was interesting because, although there's lots of different people in the family, she'd reminded me that her oldest son, he'd done a thesis in architecture, and when we were at home for my uncle's birthday, yes, in 2018, he surveyed the land for development. Yes. Not just our development, but as part of his thesis, I'm told. I'm not sure if he wants that out there, but anyway, it was kind of an interesting moment because she said, yeah, Moana did that as part of his research. And I was like, oh, did he? Because I just found it a comical thing, because inside an emergency that is like that, like the one that we had, you're not necessarily calling up the architect. But when we were trying to figure out, and when we don't have information on the ground, we were trying to then figure out where in our village is the high point. And then, of course, luckily my grandmother's village is, up the road in Hihifo. Then we're trying to figure that out. And he was saying, oh, there's signs everywhere, because only in 2018 he knew those things. And so, I was looking at a lot of different different sites, like for example, other small islands and what their Nemo response might be in order to kind of piece together potentially what might happen. There's a lot of expert people in governments and that kind of thing doing important work. But I think primarily my article was about what do people do when things go dark. And this is in terms of communications and our reliance on things like a data cable, things like the internet, is that through this pandemic, we've become quite complacent. Even having people's actual mobile phone numbers these days in the islands is a very different practice. The landline of my grandparents' house is the exact same phone number, and I know that by heart because we had to learn it as kids. But knowing what my aunt, who I see every day when I'm messaging my uncle on Messenger, I don't know her mobile phone number. And that's some of the strange kind of things culturally that have shifted, is that our practice of connecting is really a different thing. And it was quite confronting to have that quickly interrupted. Yeah.
Wow. That is a very good point, because everyone is speaking on Messenger now. So, but when it comes to phone numbers, in times of disaster, which is something that we should have recorded somewhere, right? That's a good point.
Yeah, I remember my mum was so organized with number one, she expected that you know all the numbers off by heart. She did. She knew people's numbers all over the world off by heart. And it's technology really has influenced that. And so I guess in those moments, the ones that I was speaking about in the article, I felt trapped inside the knowledge of the way that things had changed since my parents' time. Because that, you know, we didn't always have a landline in our home when my parents were a young couple. We would go in order to call Tonga, we'd get lots of coins and we'd go into Sydney at the post office, and heaps of other migrant groups were there, and they'd put 20 cents to keep talking, 20 cents. And when the money is running out and you've got a whole pile of cash and it's running out, then this is the time you say goodbye to your parents, and you may not speak for another few months. So things have shifted from when I was a child to now, where it's like, you mean I don't get to just actually see your video of, you know, the mango tree every single day, which is kind of sometimes the things that I'm talking to my uncle about. Like, it's while I'm working and then the messenger goes off, or, you know, just this accessibility. We're so used to touching each other so quickly and easily these days through the internet, that when that gets disturbed, it was just such a fascinating fall to experience.
Absolutely. It must be traumatic, because for how many hours there was no communication?
Well, it's not just that there was no communication. I think it's also that when you're sitting in an affluent space where you have internet, they don't have internet, but you have internet. So the expectation for me was on, because this is a global event that many, many satellites were picking up. So some of the people I follow, because I'm nerdy like that, on Twitter are different satellite feeds, like the people who are measuring, you know, all of the, like the sound waves that will travel across the world and that kind of thing. Sometimes too much information, you know, can make you worry more, because then I was like, oh, if they have that, then that will affect people's bodies in a particular way. Then suddenly you realize volcano is different to cyclone, which is what we're more accustomed to dealing with every year or every few years. And so just understanding that gap of preparedness, and also the gap, I guess, of like easily accessible management plans. Because sometimes the internet can fool us to think that we know things. Like people say, like, oh, Tonga doesn't have blah, 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 because they can't readily find it on the internet. Often we have to ask the question, but are you a member of the government that needs to have access to that information? Because all knowledge is not available all the time to everybody, or, you know, in all corners. But having said that, it still is the vital role of media organizations to let us know when big global events happen, big environmental events happen in our part of the world, especially given that we also know through science that there will be more of these types of events, because climate change is a real thing. And our people have been saying that loudly for a long time now.
Yes, absolutely. Now, you mentioned about, earlier on, we talked about the event here, and it goes back to 2009 to 2014. So there's been series of, the volcanic activity, in, is that how you say, Hunga Pai, Hunga Tonga?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so the two islands, that merged together after a while. Has there been, like, you've been connecting with your family in Tonga? This is something I was thinking about before our Talanoa today. Has there been any change in the way people on the ground are reacting to the volcanic activity? Did you notice any change in the conversations, or maybe in the way they were reacting to this event happening just across the harbor from Nuku'alofa?
Well, I think that's a thing that is a bit of a misnomer, is that now that now that some people have access to communicating with Tonga, it's not at all immediate. So I haven't had any contact directly with my own family on the ground. And most people also haven't. I guess I will share this. My cousin, her mother is from Hapai, and one of the villages that's been named in the the situation report. And her first realization of what actually had happened to her uncle's house was seeing one of those pictures that was captured. The house is no longer there. And for me, it's not, my story is not even really that important, because we're quite high up and we haven't, to my knowledge, my village hasn't been affected as much as all of those others. But part of the concern is to make sure that where there is aid coming from other places, or help, just any kind of help, I don't always want to use the word aid, that it goes to the people who need it the most vulnerable people. And for me, it's mostly about concerns about that, how remote spaces that are the most affected, how they're going to be looked after. And even in order to rebuild, because we know that, the news starts to shut down after about a week, but rebuild happens for quite some time afterwards. And so some of the things that has been really, really confusing for a lot of people in diaspora at the moment is working out what is the strategy moving forward for all of us who feel like we're in wealthier scenarios. And that right now is quite contentious, as well as just, I have a cousin in Utah who was contacting me, asking me, so he's been given a particular role because he works for an airline. He's been given a role to help find out what specifically they might send across. And this is the thing that's happening to Tongans all over the place, is that your Tonganness suddenly makes you an expert or the go-to person in your workplace, in your community, for the solutions. And this is the thing about vulnerable people. As I was saying before, when I was speaking to the Pacific editor at The Guardian, she's a colleague, so I trusted her to portray me in a vulnerable scenario. But I actually lost what I was saying there for a second. But part of the thing is that not all vulnerable people are in a position to give wise counsel about the scenario in those moments. And I think that that's a lot of the pressure that Tongan people outside of Tonga right now are feeling, is that we somehow have answers to questions while we're scared and vulnerable and worried, as well as knowing, you mentioned remittance before, knowing this will be a costly rebuild for some people and not so costly for other people. And so a lot of those types of concerns, what do they need? They need water and that kind of thing? Mostly we were saying to people, wait for the situation report, wait for that analysis. And it's so hard because like most islanders, everybody wants to pick up their corner of the mat and move now.
Yes.
Everybody has that feeling that, you see us in the sport and in arts and different things. We want to expel that energy and give some type of drive. But I guess the thing, in one messenger group, I said, for some of us, we need to keep our hands in our pockets for a minute. And also because we're not sure on the other end what the capabilities are. We might want to transfer funds now because that's the type of life that we live. You want food, move money. You want to go somewhere, travel, move money. But that's not always the actual solution, especially when we have a country, and this is a really key point, that has no COVID. So 300 people who want to go there and help physically. Do Tongans in Tonga want us there? Because for 2 years, they've said, we've all been sitting out, not going home. Just delay plans. And so some of the conversation is dealing with that kind of frustration because we, like most islanders, we make our plans for next time we're going. My cousin, when I was speaking about, I asked her to join a roller skating group for pandemic fun, just so we have a hobby together. And she said she can't doing a fishing license because her plan, it's easier for them to bring her grandmother from Hawaii to Sydney to look after her. She thinks once she finishes her degree, she'll go back and fish and look after her grandmother so her grandmother can be at home. And for me, sometimes when the media are asking questions and that kind of thing, they're not realizing that what people are putting away with their story when you say, so how many people of your immediate family are on the ground? It's not always brother, sister, father, mother. Yes. The important person for you is, the grandmother and everyone that whole story affects. That's a different game plan for my cousin. And the same thing for us with my uncle, who just happens to also be in a wheelchair and these kinds of things. That was a different story to tell because he's also a chiefly person. We don't present ourselves as victims ever publicly because strength and resilience is the desired trait. And that's one of the reasons why I made a point of saying the only reason why I allowed myself to be photographed in my house during a pandemic in a vulnerable emotional moment where it isn't a song that I've written and I know and I've practiced a million times and I know how to trigger that emotion and put that emotion away. I allowed that to happen because number one, I'm trained, 2, colleagues, and 3, I trust the voice of that particular organization to deal with our region well. And those things are not always there, but they're concerted decisions that are being made. Yeah, and the reason why I say that is because I'm being asked for a lot of media stuff, and I've decided to talk to nobody, just you.
Malo.
But it's because I don't know about the story that they're going to, how they will shape our people. So I do pass them on if they're looking for a specific person, and it's part of that person's healing journey to tell their story. Some people are speakers like that, but not everybody. So I'm very aware of the effects of things like disaster capital and how sometimes people, organizations, whole groups, sometimes nations can capitalize on disaster. And that's not even a new thing in the Pacific. That's my greatest fear is the effects of disaster capitalism, to be honest. Yeah, not really. We're really used to our environment. Yes. And we're used to rebuilding our families when people pass. Yeah, Tongans in particular, we are awesome at putu and funeral. Awesome. It's like our favorite. We're so good at coming back together when there's a tear in the mat. really, really
Yes.
good. But all of these things are quite new. And the other thing, yes, the other thing too is the volcano's not new. You know, our environment's not new. But things like the internet data cable, that's new.
Yeah. Yes.
It's really new. And we're also like the stress and the anxiety, even that was spoken about in that article, that's a different kind of stress, and a stress that my parents didn't have when they send their kids to their grandparents and their, you know, 20 relatives for us in their stead.
Wow.
Gosh, I feel like I've been ranting.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much. I've got our viewers just acknowledging your sharing, you know, and I just love the fact that you mentioned before, you know, you're able to navigate, yeah, those spaces. Being in the media, you have the experience of that, and also being an artist, you know, you're able to perform those roles in a very professional way, in a very professional manner. And I know at this time, you know, many of us, I even have got messages from my colleagues here in the United States asking me, you know, what is going on, Teresi? How can I help? And so I acknowledged them. And then I contacted Professor David Kaili, and also the Hawaiians. I have a few who've contacted me. And so it's really nice to have that, that, you know, island connection. You know, everyone know that we are related somehow, one way or another. And it's so nice to see people wanting to help. And so I'm also telling them the same thing you're saying, you know, just wait until we get the green light from someone out there who will tell us that this is the right time to do so. So yeah, I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of help that people are wanting to offer. But I think for those of you who are listening in, that's, I think, one of the messages that Sain is also sharing here, and so am I, in terms of the timing. So definitely there will be support needed, but at the moment, there's no media at the moment that is sharing information back to you and to the rest of the world, Saini, from Tonga. Is it just through the satellite, I understand?
Yeah, there's well, I think they have the people on different councils that are working out the aid scenario, they're in contact.
Right.
Yeah, they're in contact. And then of course, you know, there's the DFAT lines and the MFAT lines. So that's Department of Fair Trade, and I think that's what they're called. And the New Zealand one is called the MFAT.
And the New Zealand High Commission, yeah? Yeah.
You'll have to look that up on the internet. Like,
yeah. And USP, I understand.
Yeah,
the
USP
University of the
have
South Pacific. Yes.
Yeah, because they're saying that there's two satellite phones. I mean, a lot of that information as well is, I guess the other thing too is that now once there is media attention, it isn't because people want to tell the story of disaster.
Right.
It's literally the information gap.
Right.
If I can't find my uncle through my usual channels, or if a major disaster happens in any part of the world, if there are people suffering in the world, you would hope that there is, media attention on that. It's really that basic, mostly so that we're not sitting as citizens of first world countries. We're not sitting in fear for a very, very long time, which is actually what the case was. But beyond that, which is, you know, those are first world problems as well. Beyond that, it's mostly the reality as diasporic people of the limitations of the effect that we can have back home.
Yes.
And because you mentioned remittance before, many of us are still so connected. So that's actually been quite an interesting narrative, is that quite often, you know, in terms of like the storytelling organizations, is that the questions are so much more narrow than our wide experience of what social what our obligations are, and then being able to actually explain what that might be, or why the care is still so deep, even if it's not even your family. You know,
Yes.
like, that's not even your island group. What are you crying about? It's like, because it hurts. And I
Yes.
think something that I guess has been a highlight is the level of empathy that not just Tongans, I mean, Tongans do it, you know, like, we feel this way, but islanders, Pacific people, this is part of the way that we experience life. And I feel like that's what has mostly been highlighted.
Wow. That's beautiful. I also have seen some beautiful stories, and I saw the cover of your Facebook page, and that brought a smile on my face. To see how the locals were by hand, cleaning the runway,
Yeah.
on Tongatapu. I'm sure there will be stories of resilience coming through. How did you feel when you saw that story? Just by people just taking their spade and going down there and just cleaning up and clearing the ash.
Man, that spoke to so many cells inside my body, as you know, personally. And I knew that this is something that is not at all unique to me. This is also how so many Tongans around the world are feeling, because um because it speaks to the movement inside, the movement inside that makes you do something for yourself. That photo you're talking about, that was shared in the Pacific newsroom, and which is run by Michael Field, who's a journalist, and it had said, let it be known that hundreds of Tongans turned up to sweep the runway, and that they were not paid. And I feel that, especially in terms of, when we have foreign ministers and stuff, like tweeting things about how not necessarily policy. I'd love to see policy that backs up the tweets, is what I'm saying. Calling our country family when you've also been busted putting us down, when we're looking at what specifically will Australia do? And I will say this, will Australia do in terms of, what's been asked at COP? And I really feel that in terms of the climate change issues, I really feel that the words family are being thrown around a little bit differently. And the way that we experience family and our obligations to each other is something quite physical. It's a participatory thing. It's something that we do in lots of little actions in groups of people, and also when we're alone, all the time, not sometimes, and not because someone is looking. And this is the big, I think, cultural divide sometimes politically that gets demonstrated when I see an image like that. When I see an image like that with words of a journalist who has contact with us, and that they're sharing that they're proud of Tongan people. They're not Tongan people, that's us. And how I feel is that I felt really, really relieved, because I'd been updating on a thread under an image that was a satellite image of the volcano. And so the only view that I was holding was from above, not connected to what's on the ground. And to see actually the results of people doing things, Tongan people doing things, and to see that type of recognition from a media worker, sharing that, showing that our people are self-determined people, that we are a sovereign government, and that we are doing our best for ourselves. And the narrative is not, and I did have a post about that too, just about the pronunciation of hunga.
Yes.
Because it was being announced on Australian television as hunger Tonga, hunger hapai. And calling our people hungry. I don't know, but I haven't really met that many hungry Tongans. I feel like we're quite well fed. And that's not to say that we don't get hungry, but that's a framing that I felt needed to be removed. So I will say this about media workers. Since that time, I've recorded, I've received messages of how do you say these things? How do you say that? Because they're trying to train up their workers when they're doing podcasts to pronounce things better, especially when it's a flip, like hunga now becomes hunger. When we're talking about international aid and these types of things, I don't want the word hunger in the sentence. And I feel that
things like those, the language, it takes only a few seconds or less than a minute to ask, find out, what's the proper pronunciation. And I'm sure this has happened in sports field and in many other, field, but especially this time when there's a humanitarian, situation like this, and then you have that wrong pronunciation.
Yeah, I really feel that it's a good time to be good learners.
Yes.
Whenever there's difference, it's a good opportunity to be learning things. And I feel really that was what actually one of the benefits is that we rarely get to see. Tonga is on the international date line. Yes. We rarely get to see maps. They usually open it out on the international date line. We're either here or we're here.
Right.
And we're never where we really are, in the middle of our ocean, in the middle amongst this view. And so for me, one of the benefits, just as as somebody who's viewing the disaster from the outside in Australia, is to actually have all of this footage where Tonga is in the middle, where it actually says Nuku'alofa.
Wow.
And it's that's something that's quite beneficial to a lot of us, is that at least for those of us who are living outside, we get to have some pictures now where Tonga is actually in the middle of the map.
Right.
Because that's also how we position ourselves. And position ourselves for people who practice Tauhiva is everything.
Yes.
Especially for performance. Position determines the sacred, and position also determines the everyday, what's forbidden, what's loved. Yes. It's not always the thing that's right next to you. And I guess sometimes when I get asked by people who are looking for a story to tell, which is still good, is it your brother or your sister? I'm like, man, like hundreds. No, I don't talk to all of them every day.
The family tree is quite big. Yeah.
Yeah. And the relations between people and that feeling of obligation and connection is not as singular as that. And so I feel that that's the emotional wave that we've been riding and navigating has been about relationships more than anything.
Very true. Yes, so true. I really like the point you mentioned about the topic of positionality, because I remember here in Hawaii, 2018. Remember there was the explosion of the volcano here in Kilauea, and there were news items being shared in the U.S. Media that they were putting the volcano in different islands. The volcano is here on the big island, but they were putting it on Oahu, which of course the volcano is not there. It used to be there. But again, it comes back to media and them doing their part. One is the language, the importance of pronouncing it properly, spelling it correctly, because all these things, naming is such an important thing to us, right? It has to be pronounced properly. The other one is the geography, making sure that they have Tonga, in the right location of the world map. And of course, in the case of Hawaii, the volcano was shifting, depending on which media company you're talking to. And there was a joke about it. Even my colleagues in Oahu, they were messaging me and said, oh, seems like the volcano is right next door to me. And so it calls the media, right, to take action, particularly, doing their homework, so to speak, right? Just little things like that. Find the right pronunciation, find out exactly where Tonga is or where the actual geographical location, because all these things, place names and places, are so entrenched in us that they are part of us, even though it's culture and nature is one, in many of our communities. Wow. Seini, in terms of any action from many of our listeners, because I know, as I was saying before, my colleagues in the United States mainland were messaging me, Teresi, how can we help? I am now working with Professor David Kaili. If he's still listening, I know he knows that I've been channeling a lot of things to him. What would be your advice to some of our Fijians who are listening in tonight in terms of, how do they assist in any way? Is there a website that they need to go to and look into, or someone to follow on social media? Maybe we'll come to your page. You can tell our audience as well. And also if there's like a GoFundMe page or something like that, because some people are asking me as well. Over to you, Seini.
There are quite a few GoFundMe pages, mostly from a emergency management perspective.
Right.
I always suggest Tonga Red Cross, and that's definitely from my experience of reporting on the Pacific. That's who we go to for the most precise delivery of what's going to happen on the ground, and they are really, really active every time there is a disaster. So whether it's Tonga or anywhere else in the Pacific, I would say Red Cross Pacific. And then I think the major thing to understand is, who do you want to care for? I'm always a questions answer person. It's always a lot better if you do your own labor in terms of finding out who do you specifically care for and how would you like to assist personally, and to be really upfront about that. Like, some people want to give money, some people want to care for their friend. If you have a Tongan friend, sure, reach out, but that's also a little bit of labor on their part. So also just to be aware of how much labor am I imposing on people already doing other types of labor. Like, for example, I'm an Australian and I'm a Tongan. So for these moments, suddenly I've got an influx of all of like my mother's cousins on my page, just looking sometimes, not announcing things. I shared a post that was by my aunt, who's a professor of music, and she was being quite critical of the media representation. And so her relatives, who are also my common relatives, were having a proud moment on the internet. But then some of my Australian friends who are critical of Australian government, whatever scenario, they decided to use those moments to criticize Australian government. But we're having a We Love Tongans moment over here. And for me, a lot of the time, it's about choosing your scenarios of when you interact, whether you want that to be a loud moment or a quiet moment. Sometimes it's the right thing to do is to let them have their moment and their space, which is what I then had to ask the person. I agree with you. However, for people who have families and they just want them to have water and they want them to be clean and safe, they're not angry at the Australian government right now, and we don't want to have that Australian government conversation at this moment. And so for me, it's if you're to measure your distance, and going back to positionality, measure your distance from that scenario. It's not an isolated scenario. There will be other things happening, whether it's this week, next week, or in 3 years' time, and to be wise in those times as well, because Fiji is also a vulnerable space in the Pacific and in regards to this volcano. So what we don't want is for people to send all the water over there, like, don't do something over there and just to leave this place to sink. It's really important that people pay attention to what their own capability really is, especially even when it comes to mental health, because all the boats need to rise together. And we can't be weak in 6 months' time because we spent too much this month. And so for me, it's about being balanced in your approach to care for others. And I encourage that all the time with our Pacific communities, to give what you can give in this moment, but not necessarily, if you're not on the ground sweeping the runway, or if you're not building, if you're not handing out water and that kind of thing. And none of us can, because we're not allowed in Tonga. I say go find the partners who partner with the organizations on the ground who can deliver the care that you wish to give. If that's the Tongan government, good. If that's Red Cross, good. But usually there's a, there's the Tongan National Council of Churches, who obviously in Tonga can disperse care in the different places. Some people have more of affinity or friends in a particular place. So I would say find the people who partner with the people on the ground who can deliver the care that you would like to give. Yeah, so it's not about go to the, $2 shop and then buy all the blankets and then, because they may never get there. People might just need $10. Yeah, and it's not one person who can determine that. There are whole groups of people meeting to work to coordinate this effort. So number one, we don't swap, a volcano tsunami scenario for a COVID scenario in Tonga. This is really, really important. And also that, this doesn't need to affect, doesn't need to be a tsunami effect in all of our lives, because we know that the rebuild will be long. So sometimes 6 months caring for your Tongan friend in Hawaii is the better thing to do. That's my advice.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Seini. I really love the fact that you mentioned the being balanced, in the things that we can do and do what you can. But also I like the fact that, you mentioned is to work through your network. If there's a particular family or friend that you can work with, work within your means and work within your space. Wow, I love that. They're just being so practical. Seini, thank you so much. And also the topic of mental health. Thank you so much for highlighting that, because we know we're in the COVID situation, and then we have this this disaster, tsunami, and I'm sure there will be in the long term support that people on the ground will need. So in terms of the people who are listening in, Vinaka vakalevu to all our friends and family. Also, there's a Vanuatu sister listening in from Washington. Vinaka vakalevu, Dr. Mary Sovic, Netani Doriakula, and we have a sister all the way from West Africa, Ella Wanganivavalani, connecting in. Vinaka vakalevu, Vinandu Ella, for joining in and listening to Seini and I today. What a beautiful, beautiful sharing. And I'm so glad I chose you, Seini. I just love the fact that you are very pragmatic in your approach. You are very articulate, and you just mean what you say, and boom, we go for it, and we love it. And Seini, I know so many people sending their love, to you and your family. And definitely, we will definitely put the link of your Facebook page to those who want to have updates on what's going on back in Tonga. But before we finish our Talanoa today, is there anything you want to, or any messages or anything that you want to say to your family, maybe if they get a chance to watch this this interview at a later time? Anything that you want to say, or greeting, or anything, Seini, go for it.
Well, I'd really like to thank the people who have been working hard from the moment that it had happened, because I know that that your Talanoa is recorded. They might not know it now, but the work that they're doing is so deeply felt. Mostly that, and primarily for me, I'm grateful for the care that a lot of people have, even in their own focus and their attention. For the people who are not close to the scenario to actually be learning and be finding out and asking key questions to find out what is the best way for me to participate in a caring and a humanitarian way. That those emotions and that act of feeling is actually quite that's what Tonga is all about. Like, we really are, we are people who feel largely on the inside and express that generosity. And I really love that people are reflecting that back to our people everywhere we are. I did also want to say that, in terms of aid, whether it's governmental or from different charity organizations, all of the people who are actually pulling together to do these types of things, that no action is too small that isn't one that is met with deep gratitude from our people. And a lot of the time there are keywords that are usually used, like gratitude and resilience and strength. I also want to just acknowledge that the deep strength that it takes to have vulnerability, and also the deep strength that it is to receive. And so when you're asking the question of how do people give in these moments, you know, I live in Sydney, so I don't live that life that my cousin's uncle lives, where in Hawaii his house was taken by a tsunami. So I never want to speak from that position, because of course somebody would say, build me my dream home again, please. You know, and so I really do want to thank people for taking the time to be diligent, to use this sprint well for the marathon that we know disasters provide for us. It's not like this track goes round and round. And for me, sometimes the best thing is to learn one really good lesson. One of the things I've been saying to people is that at the moment, there's actually some courses online that you can do that are there until 2023 in climate change emergency management. And if you really want to do something, I think go and learn what the Australian New Zealand government has set up for those types of emergencies in the Pacific, and put your time and energy there if you have that in your body. As well as, of course, you know, by all means, send funds. That's always appreciated, because the cleanup will be very, very expensive. And the aid money doesn't actually meet that as yet. But where the right place for you to place that, I know the Tongan government have made a bank account. I know that, you know, our very oily pita from Ha'apai, the our famous flag bearer, he's waves on his GoFundMe page. But I think there isn't one favorite. It's all part of the, you know, always a much larger narrative. And for me, it's this thing of like, please remember, our work with climate change is a marathon, and this is one sprint. It's a really big one, this one, and it will take a lot to be coping with this, but we need all to get better. And there are resources online that can help us work together better. So thank you.
So Vinaka vakalevu Seini. I just got a beautiful comment from one of our sisters, Alanieta Fatiaki, who's saying thank you to you. Lots of thank yous coming through. Vinaka vakalevu kemni nawarom tikmeni kua, and the vabi Vinaka vakalevu Seini, and nona suletu nona ngona ni kua maramo so and the maro takani vakayota ko kwanongo kerker mengole mai me Talanoa. Mentaronga tu matangan do monra indobira na wekanda mai Tonga na bukunin rende erosa tabati kongo mai Tonga matinising. So I will read what Alinieta said. He said, Malo Seini, this Talanoa should be compulsory undergrad video viewing in Pacific Studies. There you go.
Oh, yay!
Wow.
One day I'll be a Pacific Studies person. Oh, thank you. Jeez, what a compliment.
Beautiful.
I am.
Yes, man. Vinaka Seini, Vinaka vakalevu Nieta. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful words. Netani Doriapula just said, thank you for the opportunity to listen to Seini during your Talanoa session. We get to hear directly from our Tongan Kainga. You know, so these are some beautiful, beautiful words shared by our listeners. Vinaka vakalevu Tetusi, Basi Say also has been commenting from the beginning. He's one of our faithful, active commenter. Vinaka vakalevu Tetusi seems like he's in the field of climate change. So maybe you two need to meet up and Talanoa. Vinaka vakalevu Tetusi, and also Eka Buonromo, they're just loving the advice you give. Very, very, you know, proactive, the way you're thinking, balanced, yeah, and realistic. Vinaka vakalevu. And Basiti Sagusangu Bambitu, all again, a big malo to you, Seini, for just your sharing today. A breath of fresh air for my program. I know you're here on a very difficult circumstances, as I was saying to you earlier on. However, with your love of the arts, love of activism, and your love of media, I'll be very happy, to bring you back on board on my program, in the future throughout the year 2022, and just talk in Talanoa about issues facing our region. Because I'm looking at Talanoa with Dr. T expanding from the beautiful paradise of Fiji across to the wider Moana, and also acknowledging Dr. Mary Sovic from Vanuatu. So Dr. Mary, I know where you're sitting in Washington. I will come knocking on your door. She's also the director of Melanesian Women Today, which is, a very wonderful project. Yeah, a very beautiful program that connects all the women, in the region of Melanesia. And I'm so blessed to be working with her too. And then one more comment, if that's okay with you. I'll be reading these beautiful comments, but I know you'll have time to read later. One from our sister from Ono Ilau. As you know, Ono is right close to Tonga. And during the tsunami, it also impacted Ono, where she's from. So, Mirise Vati, Vinaka vakalevu Mirise, Ofalahi Atu Seini, our prayers are with Tonga and our Tongan Kainga, and she's thanking this opportunity for us to meet in Talanoa today. So those are just some few words, Seini, on behalf of all our listeners. Just wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule, and also with the demand from various media sources that want to talk to you. But I feel really privileged that you say yes to my request.
Well, I call myself your biggest fan. I hope I'm not too busy on your pages. But thank you so much. It's just I'm happy to go back to being a viewer now.
Oh, Vinaka vakalevu.
Beautiful time.
Vinaka, we just wanted to say how we appreciate your story, and it's just so lovely that it's coming from the heart. It's very honest Talanoa, and it's from your perspective and how you feel about things. And I know your Fijian brothers and sisters, with our Tongans listening in, we are right there with you. And I'm sure many of our listeners will want to touch base with you at some point, particularly as you were saying about the marathon that is in front of us. I know that in months to come, there will be a lot of rebuilding that needs to happen. So definitely a lot of us will want to collaborate with you. And if it's okay, that I can share your page with our listeners, and they can be able to get more updates and things like that in the days to come, particularly as we hear more about what's happening in Tonga. Vinaka vakalevu Seini.
Vinaka, Malo, aupito.
Yes, thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Naka, Malo. Yes, Vinaka vakalevu sara vikim nina varong tikumai. Ela finau madeawa ang ganababalangi. Netani doria kula. Mirise dati. Dombula Vinaka. Merseni. Balelevu kan boleh Vinaka marabatua kangu. Vikim ni kada na sema tikumai. Maru taka vakalevu na nomuni vito po ni mai. Akaneta rakaseta. Na nomuni vararong mai meta me vitala novat ki Seini Taumoepeau na nungu kani mai serene koe maramando vakaitai ben vika vaka as an artist do vakaitai vakalibu koe libu na kali vakataso sua tiko talanga ko na tambani kadi baki na recho libu na vika vai do vai tepti koe kin mani vatataru tiko di manda mona sureta mai me mai talano manda ngabika na buku ni vika sa tabat ti kuerna bekanda may tong. Yung marusar ni baka yoko may ngolemay o ni taka ni talitaka. Nasika ni mataka na walo talaga nakaloka na kavi makango and nasiyama ti kumikino Professor Patrick Nang. And ngal talchmo ko na University of Sunshine Coast may Australia and naniro may bitan no takatiko na baka hindi keso baka sainisi and nakabati ko ko na was Pacific and nabukunika nando baka di kevin na be tabua se be uli ni bono kama era tu en bote ni solo ko kerekim ni ngol kin meningay siya mamay and wala kolok ni mataka ni tostik nga nanda huli kay nanda biba kong getiti ko nangon rendre era staba ti konggo na bekanda may tonga usaba ka madan bikem ni Vinaka vakalevu sara na munisia mamai ni kalau ngata tiko me tau tala nonta sota na singa katarawe ni mataka ni mwere